Welcome back to Torn Apart, and today we're doing Summer at the Movies, which is something that I like to do every single year, where I basically recommend you the best movies/TV shows that you want to go and seek out, whether on streaming services, at the cinema, it doesn't really matter.
When I met you in the summer, to my heartbeat sound.
No! God, please, no! No!
I always try to make a list of things that most people don't talk about. This is also why you'll probably not see a review from me for like a new Transformers movie or The Flash, because there are like literally millions of people who are already reviewing those movies here on YouTube. So I'm like, let's do something weird, let's do something original, and actually recommend you movies that you would not think about watching unless someone actually tells you to watch them.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in. Have you ever seen me without this stupid hat on? That's weird.
With maybe one exception, because I saw it yesterday. We're gonna be starting with Elemental, which is the new Disney Pixar movie. I really loved it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars rating on Letterboxd.
Watch this!
There's a lot of people who are not enjoying it, mostly because it feels like a knockoff version of Zootopia mixed with Inside Out when it comes to the animation style for all the characters. But it's so incredibly beautiful, it's so incredibly complex and dense if you just look at all the details they decided to put in the background. And even though the story is not as existential, it's not as deep as most Pixar movies, if you think about Soul, for example, or even Inside Out at the end of the day, I really fell in love with this story, mostly because it felt like it's one of the first good romantic comedies that we've seen in the last 10 years at least. Even when it comes to animated movies, if you think about the romantic comedy subgenre, we only have princess and prince stuff, right? If you think about it, because these kind of movies tend to be aimed at children, and so we don't really address love, we don't really address longing or even like sexual desire at the end of the day in these kind of movies. And I will have to say that Elemental is probably like one of the horniest movies I've seen in a really long time.
I'm blowing my fucking load, you guys!
It has a bit of a tragic aspect to it as well, kind of like a Romeo and Juliet thing, where the two main characters who end up falling in love with each other, they literally cannot touch each other because they feel like they're literally gonna kill each other. So there is a lot of drama going on with this film, and I think it pays off quite well. So just by giving you these expectations, you already know if you're gonna love this movie or not, because if you don't like this aspect, if you think it's too dramatic, it's too over the top, you're definitely not gonna enjoy the movie, because at the end of the day, I think that they kind of failed at making some kind of social commentary with the different analogies that they built up with all the different elements living in Element City. I was kind of confused with most of the film. I was just sitting there being like, wait, the main family, are they supposed to be like of Indian descent? Are they supposed to be more like East Asian? Or are they supposed to be like West African or something like that? It was not clear at all what kind of culture they were talking about, and at the end of the day, it's kind of became all of the same. It reminded me of Jewish cultures like living in New York. Also, if you think about the fire metaphor, it could also be linked, for example, to Mexico or to South American immigrants just in general. So just because it was not that specific, it ended up losing a bit of the audience in my opinion, and that's why most people and most critics call this movie a failure from like a thematical perspective, and I kind of agree with that. That's mostly why I gave it a 4-star rating, just because I think it's definitely not as perfect as they thought it would be.
You're so hot.
Excuse me?
Bombastic
No,
side
I mean like you're smoking. No, I didn't mean it like that.
Are you done yet?
Yes, please.
And another thing that I didn't like about this movie, and that could have been improved like 100%, it's the world building, of course. I feel like we're really skimming just the surface of this universe here. Like, I really didn't understand, for example, why Fireland was so incredibly separate from the city. I didn't really understand why you could see like racism and intolerances only mostly in flashbacks aspects but not in everyday life. Because if you think about it, if they have their own neighborhood and if the fire people literally do not try to interact with most of the rest of society, then I'm pretty sure that they would be racist and antagonistic on an everyday basis. Like, it makes no sense at all when you think about it. And I feel like maybe they didn't want to make this movie like too deep at the end of the day, or even too aggressive, because it would have been really sad for like an animated movie mostly aimed at children to be this antagonistic towards a certain kind of people. But just to say that, for example, the movie doesn't really tell us much about the wind people as well as the tree people. We don't really get to explore their lifestyles. We just see them going on in the background, going to work, and how they interact with different like modes of transportation, for example. But we don't really go deep into their characters, into their inner lives, and at the end of the day we don't really understand how everything comes together. If you think about Zootopia, for example, if you can draw a parallel with that movie there, you can really see the differences, because that movie was kind of like divided in between people who were predators and people who were not predators, basically, at the end of the day. And the society was well structured. It made us immediately relate to everyone involved in this society, and it's not really the case with this one here, because it is really focusing on water versus fire. And even when you look at the water people, they're mostly like really nice people at the end of the day. They don't really feel that complex. If there is one thing that I loved about it though, is that the water people seems to be incredibly hypersensitive, which is something that we don't really see represented in society. Like, people that tend to emote quite a lot, they tend to cry at almost everything that happens, they tend to be really attached to their feelings and other people's feelings as well. So I really liked how they explored that aspect, that at the end of the day it's something that is quite common on TikTok, for example, where people like explain what it feels like to be hypersensitive. I thought it was really cute at the end of the day, mostly because we don't really have that kind of representation, especially for male heroes within the romantic comedy genre as well. The next movie I wanted to review is Daliland. I've heard absolutely no one talk about this. I haven't seen any reviews on YouTube as well. It kind of popped out of nowhere, and I was like, I like Salvador Dali. I would be really interested in knowing more about his life, his work, the people he was surrounded with. So I was like, let's give it a watch.
The paint disappears and becomes reality. Sometimes it is so hard being Dali.
Ben Kingsley is a really good actor, and I was really intrigued by the fact that this movie is directed by Mary Harron, who is the director from American Psycho and also the movie like Charlie Says, for example. Maybe you don't know this about me, but I'm not a huge fan of biopics. It takes like quite a lot of work and originality when it comes to the structure, when it comes to the visual style and the intention behind a movie to actually intrigue me, to actually make me love it. And this biopic is one of those forgettable ones once again. It is not strictly following like Salvador Dali's life in a Wikipedia page structure, but at the end of the day it is neither giving us enough details about his life, and it's not really weird enough to be a movie about Salvador Dali. As I was watching it, I was like, I can see like a completely different version of this movie which would be so much better. But can you imagine, for example, if we started with the very end of his life and then we went backwards and backwards and backwards? So we started with the absolute best of his career, and we slowly went back to him being discovered and stuff like that, until we finished the movie with him being born and experiencing his first ever dream. Then give this project to Iñárritu, for example. Of course you have to pick actors who are actually Spanish, for example, because this is something that I really hated about this movie. This has almost zero Spanish. It doesn't have that many like dialogue lines with subtitles, and it was a huge shame at the end of the day, especially for a character like him. I understand that it's set in Europe, and most of the artists in that time period, they used to travel quite a lot in between different countries, and they used to speak like French and Italian and English, and it's a mix of everything. But at the same time, you're losing completely the roots of Salvador Dali when you don't actually make him speak Spanish for a lot of the movie. So it's really sad. So at the end of the day, this was incredibly bland, incredibly forgettable. I gave it like a 2 out of 5 stars rating on Letterboxd, but just because I wanted to be nice, it could have gone way lower, because honestly this is a movie that I will forget by the end of today. I'm not even kidding.
Butterfly. Butterfly.
Watch yourself.
Let's talk about a series now, and it's about Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a 3-episode series called Arnold, and it's a biopic, of course, so let's stay on that biopic vibe.
No matter what it takes, work your ass off. Do it. Do it now.
I enjoy it at the end of the day. I think they could have explored a lot more of his life. It's divided in 3 chapters, as I said. The first one is exploring his bodybuilding career. The second one is actor/star career. And the third one, his politician career as the governor of California, basically. And the last part is actually the most interesting part because it's the one that I didn't know that much. While I knew a lot about the actor career, of course, because I grew up with Arnold just on my TV screen, for example. And the bodybuilding part, I know it mostly because I am a bodybuilder as well, so of course Arnold is something that lingers at the back of everyone's minds within the bodybuilding community. Once again, it feels like we're skimming through the surface. We're not really going deep enough. When it comes to the bodybuilding part, for example, it literally sums up the steroid part in one sentence, moves on to something completely different, which is kind of a shame, I think. He's clearly trying to stay away from controversies. Since he's quite an old man at the end of the day, he's kind of like at the end of his career. It would be way more interesting to make a retrospective and to actually be critical about everything that happened to him and what he did to other people as well. Because in the second chapter, for example, we talk about sexual abuse/harassment allegations, and even though he seems to be really sorry about the stuff that he did, the fact that he fathered a child, for example, with someone else and he destroyed his marriage, once again, it feels like he doesn't want to comment too much on it. In fact, for that period of his life, he tends to give that to someone else so that they can summarize it and talk about all the different controversies, and he doesn't really talk about them openly and analyze them, you know. And it's kind of a shame, I think, because if you actually want to convince us that you're someone who changed and who is really like sad about the things that he's done to other people, taking advantage of his fame, basically.
Well, I've narrowed your choices down to 5 unthinkable options. Each will cause untold misery.
I picked number 3.
You don't even want to read them first?
I was elected to lead, not to read. Number 3.
Then you actually need to explore that in a kind of therapeutic environment when you think about it. So this show is really missing that, and it's a bit of a shame, I think. One thing that I really liked was the aspect of his family history and exploring all of that, the abuse that he suffered because of his father, and how him and his brother basically dealt with PTSD in completely different ways. And you could really feel that Arnold has a lot of problems and he wants to put them under the rug and keep going. That is kind of the main message of this show. That's why he became so famous, because basically he ignored most of the problems that were going on in his life. He put them under the rug and he kept going, and he actually was proud of that. And I'm like, this is such a boomer mentality. Like, you're supposed to take care of your mental health at the end of the day. Look at what happened to your brother, for example. I mean, it's mean put like that, but I'm just saying that it would have been interesting for him to challenge his way of thinking with the help of a therapist, for example. There are other things, like he talks a lot about Stallone and his rivalry within the acting period in the 80s and the 90s, but they never actually meet. This is something I don't like about this documentary. Even though it's well filmed and everything, I feel like it's missing a lot of like human touch, you know? Like, it really feels like Arnold is in front of the camera, other people are in front of the camera, but they now actually never meet, which is a bit of a shame, I think, because it could create interesting conversations. And it really feels like they shot this as fast as possible on a shoestring budget because they thought it would be quite lucrative at the end of the day, and it's a bit of a shame. So I gave it like 2.5 over 5 stars on Letterboxd. This is something you're gonna enjoy just if you like Arnold as a person, if you'd like to know more about his life, but it's nothing quintessential at the end of the day. Now, to talk about something completely different, let's talk about the movie that won the Grand Prix at the Cannes Festival. I'm talking about Claire Denis' new movie, which is called Stars at Noon.
What are your motives?
I wanted to know the exact dimensions of hell.
So many dreams we share, like the stars at night.
I saw it at the cinema a couple of days ago. It was honestly quite incredible. It reminded me of things like On the Road, those kind of like traveling movies where you don't really know what is happening. It's very chaotic, you don't know exactly what's going on, and I think it's 100% on purpose, meaning that you've got these journalists who are basically living in Nicaragua and they are trying to basically survive because it's really hard from like a political but also from an economy perspective to actually be there. And there is a lot of talk about corruption, about elections going on at the same time, and it's kind of fascinating because this is a movie where you just sit there and you're like, I don't understand about anything that is happening, and it's exactly the same thing that the main characters are feeling. So you're really emotionally attached to these people. You don't really need to know that much about them, about what they were doing in their previous life. In fact, you could probably sum up the two main characters in just like a couple of sentences. Like, one is a wannabe journalist who is quite young and nobody takes her seriously, mostly because she's a woman in the field within a really harsh environment. And the other guy used to be married and he's a journalist as well, but at the same time he's trying to make money through shady businesses. Those are basically the only things that we know about these two characters, but it's enough, mostly because the action around them is so incredibly interesting and we were constantly wondering what is going on, why is this happening to them, it's so unfair, and it feels like everyone is a character. It's not just like people perceived as villains, it really feels like there is more complexity going on and you really attach yourself to almost everyone that you see on screen because of their personal struggles, which are very often like exemplified by very tiny things going on. A car being burned, for example, and a guy not being able to sell it at the end of the day and you see him crying in a corner, for example. A woman who is running her hotel and she has to deal with people who are basically threatening their customers and she doesn't know what to do, who to support at the end of the day. It's incredibly fascinating. This is also another movie that is really horny. Honestly, like the sex scenes in this movie are quite incredible because you can really feel the female gaze, you can really feel like the camera lingering on body parts without necessarily like fragmenting it or objectifying it. You've got certain scenes and certain dialogue lines which felt like things that normal people could go through. It also has one of the first, if not the only one I could think of, period sex scenes that I've seen in a really long time. And I also have to stress this is probably one of the best performances I've ever seen out of Margaret Qualley. I would go as far as saying it's one of my favorite performances of the year, and I'm not even surprised because Claire Denis is a really good director. If you've seen High Life, for example, she really inspires actors to give her like some incredible performances, and this is where you can recognize that she's an amazing director because, as I said, you don't really need that much. As long as you have a clear direction, as long as you have a clear visual style and a clear idea of what you're trying to do, it doesn't really matter what the story is, what the characters are, you're gonna get the attention of the audience no matter what. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd and I really recommend it, even though you have to be careful. This is a movie that can be quite boring sometimes because it's really slow, it's really taking its time, and some people might be kind of annoyed by the fact that it kind of leaves a lot of questions unanswered at the end of the day, because this is not really about that. Now let's talk about another biopic. It feels like the theme for today is very biopic inspired, and I really didn't want to watch this movie. I kind of forced myself into it because I'm like, no one has talked about it. It seems like an interesting story at the end of the day, even though I really don't care about Flamin Hot Cheetos.
Flamin Hot Cheetos, so hot, careful where you eat them.
Yes, I'm talking about Flamin Hot, which is basically the biopic around the creation of the Flamin Hot Cheetos, and it was incredible. If you compare it to Daliland, for example, when it comes to like being true to like traditions, a specific culture and the roots of a certain community, this is like one of the best movies about the Mexican community living in a specific time in the US that I've probably ever seen. Also, it has a really interesting directorial style because we kind of have the same thing that you've seen in Ant-Man as well, where you've got like one of the main characters played by Michael Pena, who basically like dubbing everyone else's with his own accent and way of talking, and it's incredibly funny.
Of course, I asked Kim, did Emily tell Carlos to tell you to get to me what kind of safe it was? And he says, nah, dog. All she said is that it's like super legit and whatever's in it, it's gotta be good.
What?
And the main character from Flamin Hot does it quite often, and it turns out really good because at the end of the day he's kind of like showing us the way that he perceives life, whether it is different businesses or whether it is how white people talk to each other in different environments. It was so incredibly funny and it worked out quite well. I think the thing that made this movie so incredible is also the fact that it is basically starring mostly nobodies. I didn't recognize most of the actors, and if I did recognize them, they usually play like secondary characters in like very big movies, for example. This gave a completely different feeling to the movie. It felt incredibly genuine. It felt like it was real people being put in camera. It felt like a cinema verite kind of biopic, to the point that people were not even that like beautiful, or they were not like wearing a lot of makeup, for example. It really felt like they were real people from the community telling their own story, and it was incredible at the end of the day. Honestly, I didn't find anything that I didn't like about this movie, so I gave it like a perfect score, like 5 out of 5. This is one of those biopics that is without a doubt one of the best stories that I've ever seen on screen. It's nothing special, of course, because it's a really tiny like moment of history at the end of the day, and we're talking about Cheetos, but they really managed to convince us on why this story needed to be told. And it's also nice to see it told by people of a certain community instead of like the usual white people. If you think about Mark Zuckerberg, if you think about Steve Jobs, if you think about like Elon Musk as well, I mean, very often when you have biopics, it's white people telling stories about white people things. So it was really refreshing to see something like that. I'm pretty sure you're gonna love it. I found it on Disney Plus. I think it's produced by Star, so give it a watch because it's really fun.
Burns good or burns bad?
It burns good.
Now let's head into our final review for today and talk about yet another TV series. It's probably the one that really made you click on this video. We're talking about Black Mirror. I'm a huge Black Mirror fan. We're talking about the new season, of course, and the new 5 episodes that just came out. I'm gonna be reviewing each and every one of them as fast as possible because I don't want to spoil them, but at the same time I have to say that I was really underwhelmed and I was kind of disappointed by this new season. If you want to have my final score already, to give you an idea, I gave it like a 2.2 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. Even though I might sound quite harsh when I'm like reviewing some of the episodes, it's because they don't feel like Black Mirror episodes, meaning that they're just random short films that sometimes could have been cut from other series like American Horror Story, for example, or even Cabinet of Curiosities, which is something that came out like last Halloween, for example, by Guillermo del Toro. Just to say that the main point of Black Mirror is talking about technology and how basically technology and humans, they kind of interact to ruin each other's lives. And there are a lot of episodes in this season that do not touch that element at all.
Hi everybody. Welcome to your next episode, mother. You, Streamberry.
The first one is actually my favorite, and I clearly understand why they decided to start the season with that one. It's Joan is Awful. This is a good Black Mirror episode. I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, and the whole concept is kind of like making fun of Netflix, for example, of the algorithm, of artificial intelligence, CGI, and kind of taking advantage of the fact that most people don't read contracts to steal their image, to steer their lives, and it's really scary. Like this episode here is a classic Black Mirror episode where you finish it and you're like, wow, I really hope that doesn't happen to me, but it still has like a heartwarming ending. This is something that I can say about most of these shorts in this season here. It's that maybe the creators have been touched quite a lot by the pandemic, so they decided to be a bit more optimistic at the end of the day. Most of the shorts tend to leave a bit of a bitter taste at the back of your tongue, where you feel like it's sad, but at the same time you feel like the characters are kind of like going in a good direction at the end of the day. I still didn't give it like a perfect score for this episode because this is kind of talking about the multiverse once again, and I really feel like they could have made their own version of Everything Everywhere All at Once, with so many different versions of Joan trying to do the same things in different ways, in different interpretations of the same kind of like streaming TV show, but they didn't do that. They just stuck with basically 2 different versions of Joan, and they briefly mentioned another version of Joan at the end, and they briefly mentioned mention the Kate Blanchett as well, but it's a bit of a shame because I felt like they could have pushed it way further than they actually did.
I was married. The way they behaved that night, the whole experience, made me think that maybe Ian Adair hadn't acted alone.
Police have announced shocking new discoveries about the notorious Loch Henry murders of the 1990s.
Then we jump into Loch Henry, which funny enough is another episode that was teased in the first episode as well, talking about Streamberry, talking about Netflix as well. And there I could actually see why this episode was not going to be working. Because it really felt like Netflix was patting itself on the back, being like, oh, we have the best idea ever, just make fun of us for as many episodes as possible. But that's not the Black Mirror concept at the end of the day. So this second episode here just didn't feel like a Black Mirror episode at all, because it's like a docu-series at the end of the day. They're trying to uncover a mystery that is very personal at the end of the day. It has a very bleak and cynical ending, of course. Also, it felt kind of cliche. I've seen quite a lot of docu-fictions, and I felt that if they wanted to push it a bit further, they should have pushed it way deeper into the making of aspect of it, meaning that the entire show should have been like a meta commentary of making a docu-fiction, while they barely scratched the surface once again. Then we head into Beyond the Sea, which is a classic Black Mirror episode. Finally, we're talking about technology, we're talking about people living basically in a space station. I like the idea that this is like an alternative version of America in the 60s, and I love the fact also they're like reusing some of the things that happened within the 60s, like tragic things. If you think about Charles Manson, for example, and the killings that he did on just innocent people just because no reason whatsoever. So they play a lot with those themes and those references, and it works quite well. But at the end of the day, it was kind of cliche. Like, I saw the twist coming from so far away, and I just didn't understand exactly why certain characters, especially Josh Hartnett, was acting the way that he was. There were a lot of things that were not really clear. The ending, for example, kind of comes out of nowhere, and it really felt like they wanted to rush it as fast as possible. This could have been a really interesting movie at the end of the day, and it really felt like it was also missing another final act where the two actual astronauts would face each other in the real world, so in the space station, instead of like trying to delay that as much as possible. It just felt like they were forcing like a bleak ending for the purpose of forcing a bleak ending. From a structural perspective, it was maybe an interesting episode. I just really liked the themes at the end of the day and not necessarily the execution. So that's why I'm like, this is a good episode, but it's not an excellent episode nonetheless. Then we head into the last two episodes, which are literally like not Black Mirror episodes at all. They could have come out from any of the other TV shows that I mentioned before. We've got Maisie Day and we've got Demon 79.
Uh-oh. Stinky poop. Poopies, funny poopies, la 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 la.
Maisie Day is kind of like, I mean, I need to spoil this to actually tell you how stupid this sounds. It's a werewolf story. And the paparazzi aspect, I don't really understand what was going on with it. It felt like they had two completely different stories and they tried to blend them together. And they wanted to explore a weird message about like how people are obsessed with celebrities and stuff like that, and how that obsession can like hurt the celebrities because they're real people at the end of the day. But they didn't explore that aspect that much at the end of the day, mostly because they just squeezed in a weird werewolf story that just came out of nowhere, that had no like backstory whatsoever, that had no explanation, and it just ended abruptly and we don't really know how to feel about any of it. The main characters, we don't really know that much about them, we don't really relate to them. This was one of my least favorite episodes in the series, mostly because it felt like a film graduation project in the way that you're hinting at interesting things but you're actually not exploring any of them. And if you talk about Demon 79, it's the same thing. It's a weird like Good Place vibes, meaning that they're kind of like trying to deform the way that we perceive demons and the relationship that they want to create with humans. Maybe the only interesting thing about this episode is like the execution and the fact that it's kind of talking about social issues, what it feels like to be like an Indian immigrant living in the UK in a very specific time where immigrants, for example, were really hated, and it's kind of like mirroring on things that are going on like nowadays at the end of the day if you look at Brexit. But at the same time, the demon, how is it related to Black Mirror at all? Like, it feels like it came out of a completely different series. Also, something that Black Mirror was always good at was kind of like trying to make you care about even the most evil people ever and make you understand the consequences of people's choices. And this entire episode is not really about consequences because there is like an apocalypse threat at the end of the day, but we don't really understand why we're supposed to care and why our main character is supposed to care about saving all of these racist people at the end of the day. It felt like he was missing like character development at the end of the day. We didn't really understand why she was doing the things that she was doing, whether it was just her trying to get some agency in her life, trying to get revenge, or at the end of the day because she was actually a good person who wanted to save the world for a very specific reason because she loved the world or something like that. But at the end of the day, we didn't get any of that, and it's a bit of a shame because we don't really care about the consequences. We don't really care about what happens in the ending of this episode at all. This is the theme for today. At the end of the day, let's not make mediocre movies / film series that barely scratch the surface, especially if you're adapting real life stories. Am I right? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know down in the comments if you've seen any of these movies or shows and what you thought about them. And if you haven't seen them, go watch them and then let me know if you agreed with my review. If you like this video, you're probably gonna like what I made last week, which was a surprisingly successful final video about The Walking Dead. I'm incredibly happy and proud of this video, mostly because most of my Walking Dead videos don't tend to make quite a lot of viewers at the end of the day. And this one here, even though it's a small scale, of course, it attracted some attention, so I'm really happy about it. So give it a watch. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to the Mexican community and their Flamin Hot Cheetos, because honestly, I'm really proud of you. Like, this is like a super tiny thing and probably nobody remembers or cares about the origins of Flamin Hot Cheetos, but the movie really made me care. So give some love to the Mexican communities in the US. I'm Patrick and this is Torn Apart.
Young man, that piece of technology will be the death of you.
Silly grandpa, don't worry about it. If I don't like it, I can just return it. A little technology never killed anyone.
Well, would you look at that? How ironic.